Malatya, eastern Turkey, 130 miles from the epicenter. Halila district in the southeast, 150 miles from the center and hours after the first shot. The 7.8 magnitude quake first struck at 4:17 a.m. local time. Then, 9 hours later, a second one, 7.5 magnitude, hit on a separate fault line. The lag between quakes meant buildings collapsed around rescue efforts. People didn't know what side of the emergency cordon to stand on, didn't know where to run.
Güvenli alana geçiyoruz bizler şu anda. Vatandaşları da görüyorsunuz. Deprem oluyor gene.
Seismic destruction live on television. Everyone became a rescue worker.
Gel sen de çabuk gel, çabuk gel. Bırak onları gel.
There's no Richter scale equivalent for measuring the human cost of all of this. The death toll for now, 2,600, but that is expected to rise. The injured, 13,000 so far. Thousands of buildings have collapsed, and it was felt across more than 4 countries. Close to the epicenter and earlier in the day, a drive through Katram and Maras. Barely a building not damaged or destroyed. Flashes of the now homeless. Instead of roofs, just blankets. In Malatya, another driver captures this. In the same district, the crisis is compounded by the cold. Freezing conditions, both hampering the rescue effort and leaving those without shelter exposed. The residents of a destroyed nursing home huddled together in the snow. Turkey sits on the Anatolian tectonic plate between 2 major fault lines. This makes it a hotbed for seismic activity. In 1999, for example, more than 17,000 people were killed. Turkey's President Erdogan went back further, though, in an address this morning. Said this was the worst disaster in the country for over 80 years and referenced an earthquake where over 30,000 people were killed.
This morning at 4:17 a.m, we were struck by the worst disaster of the century. The worst since the 1939 Erzincan earthquake.
The fractured politics of the region, both in Turkey and in neighbouring Syria, is already becoming a talking point when it comes to how and to whom aid is delivered. 45 countries have so far offered help with search and rescue. Even Ukraine's President Zelensky said he was ready to provide assistance. Britain has sent 76 search and rescue specialists.
Çocuk çıktı. Çocuk çıktı.
As the world tries to come to terms with the enormity of what's happened, expect individual stories of heartbreak and of resilience and of rescue. Like this little girl. People who survived just because of what house or room they happened to be in. And people who did not, for the very same reason.
Well, the scenes of devastation in Syria are distressingly familiar. But as the emergency workers known as the White Helmets pull people from the rubble today, the cause is a natural disaster rather than the war that's inflicted so much suffering over the past 12 years. Among the quake's victims are people who had already fled violence multiple times. And a warning, this report from our Foreign Affairs correspondent Sikander Kermani contains distressing images.
There are children trapped under the rubble here since 4 in the morning, the narrator says frantically. There's no rescue equipment. They're using their bare hands, he says. From underneath the debris, the voice of a little girl. I can't move, she says. We're coming for you, they promise. But we don't know what happened next. This is Jandaris in northern Syria, close to the Turkish border. A third of the town has been destroyed, locals say. The entire town has been consumed by loss and despair. Here, a father mourning a child. There are 12 families trapped here, and no one managed to get out, says this man. You can see the shock on his face. No one has come to help us yet, he adds. We've been digging with our hands since 3 a.m. This young girl was pulled alive from the debris. But stories of hope are overshadowed by those of pain. Her mother, brother and sister were all killed. Northern opposition-controlled Syria was already in a dire humanitarian situation. For years at the centre of the Syrian conflict, bombed and besieged with millions displaced, now in the midst of freezing weather and a cholera outbreak. The devastation caused by the earthquake has cut across the front lines of Syria's brutal war. Bashar al-Assad's regime now hold most of Syria, including the city of Aleppo. Kurdish forces control significant swathes close to the border with Turkey, as do Turkish-backed Syrian rebels, whilst much of Idlib province is ruled by an armed rebel group accused of links to extremists. In the opposition-controlled towns, the White Helmets, best known for responding to Russian and regime airstrikes, have been at the forefront again. In under-resourced hospitals, beds are full, body bags cover the floor.
We felt the quake. It was very strong, so we grabbed the kids and ran outside. Just as we got to the entrance of our building, it collapsed. It just collapsed around us. We were saved because of a wooden door which fell on us. The building was 4 stories. No one else in the block survived.
In the regime-controlled city of Hama, rescue teams worked amidst heavy rain, pulling out yet more dead bodies. This disaster and the pain it's brought, crossing even the most bitter political divides.
Well, earlier I spoke with Ismail al-Abdullah from the Syrian White Helmets in northern Idlib, and I asked him what happened when the earthquake started.
I was in my house. I grabbed my children when the ground was started to shake and the building was shaking, and ran to the street to save my family. After a few minutes, I learned and got news about dozens of buildings collapsed. In the morning, when we started to see the sun, we heard the news about that all northwest Syria, in each village, there are buildings that collapsed on the families, and there are thousands of people right now under the rubble. All the White Helmets volunteers are on the field working, carrying out rescue operations, search and rescue operation. We retrieved 450 dead bodies from under the rubble. We rescued 1,100 civilians from under the rubble.
In that moment, you are in a very, very difficult position. You're a White Helmets volunteer, but your first priority, presumably, to try and get your children out, your family to safety.
We were sleeping, me and my kids. So the first thing happened that the building was shaking left and right, and something like the whole building will collapse on us. So we walked for hours, so the earthquake was stopped. Just a few, 1 block from my house, there was a building. Our neighbors right there in the house, there were about 15 civilians died under the mountain of rubble that in seconds actually after the earthquake.
As a member of the White Helmets, of course, sadly, you became used to dealing with the impact of the war. I just wonder, is this very, very different? Are you equipped to deal with the magnitude of need here?
Northwest Syria is not equipped to deal with anything. Like this disaster need international efforts to deal with this. For us, it was like today was horrible day for us. It's different, totally different. All the teams, this big number, more than 2,000 volunteers on the field, would not enough, and the equipment that we have are not enough to respond to rescue the people. So this is it needs international effort to handle this.
You are rescuing people, you are pulling them from the rubble, but because of the war, presumably, when you take them to the hospital, the facilities are just not good enough. There are not enough. Is that right?
Yeah, they're not enough. They're not enough. Now we're talking about 1,000, and the number will rise. As we talk right now, the number will rise. We don't have enough hospitals to receive those injured people. We don't have medical supplies for them. Those injured people need medical care, special medical care. They need surgeries. They need many things. So we don't have this infrastructure. We don't have that strong health sector. We don't have that can contain this disaster. In Northwest Syria, it's not ready to handle this kind of disaster. It's very difficult. It's bigger than the White Helmet. It's bigger than any NGO operating on the Northwest Syria.
And of course, in northwestern Syria, you have some areas held by government forces, some areas held by rebel forces, opposition forces. How does that complicate things, do you think, in terms of trying to get help?
This is complicated, the situation that all the parties, all the cities need help. So for us, it put pressure on us that we need to work hard, and maybe we'll not get help from anyone. No one will send blankets. No one will send anything.
If you don't get help immediately, what do you fear will happen? You've also got very, very cold, bitter weather to contend with.
We will lose lives. We will lose people. We will lose children who now stuck under rubble. Maybe we'll lose people who are injured. This is going to be another catastrophe, not the earthquake, but after the earthquake, those people need medical care. Those who need shelter, need drinkable water. They need blankets. They need respond immediately.
Ismail Al-Abdullah, thank you so much for talking to us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the Foreign Office has pledged to help Turkey with the deployment tonight of search and rescue specialists, equipment and an emergency medical team. The government has also joined other nations offering humanitarian support in Syria. Just before we came on air, I spoke to Kaan Sana, Director of International Policies at Turkey's Red Crescent. He's in Ankara tonight. I asked him what the main focus of the rescue operation is at the moment.
Our public authorities try to deploy as many search and rescue teams because, they are trying to lessen the lead time. So the more search and rescue team we have, the more, possibility that we are saving lives.
The UK and other countries are sending help with search and rescue, including dogs. What more do you need at this moment?
Of course, after 6 hours, the priority is gonna shift to other needs, such as shelter. So we are trying to cover the basic needs on the ground. And also we try to, back up search and rescue efforts.
Which are the worst areas and cities affected?
The worst affected city, actually province, is Marash. But of course, this earthquake affected multiple locations in 10 cities, and the damage can be classified from slight to heavy.
We have heard President Erdogan say that this is the worst crisis since 1939 in Turkey. 33,000 people died then. Are we really looking at that scale of damage?
Yes, this is one of the worst disasters that we have had for years. This one is affected at multiple locations, so the damage is seen in a curve, extending from Hatay to Gaziantep and Malatya.
The fact that there were 2 earthquakes and multiple aftershocks, how difficult has that made your operations?
First of all, the response teams should focus on multiple locations. So this is the factor making it difficult for us to respond.
And just tell us what your operations are going to be focused on tonight. Is it rescuing people and getting them shelter? What will be the focus?
Our priorities is to address basic needs, which is, the provision of blankets, non-food items, and food items. So, for example, we have operational soup kitchens in the region. We are providing hot meals to the people in need because the weather conditions is very harsh. So we are trying to, mitigate the impact of these harsh weather conditions.
Okay. Well, I think everyone will be wishing you and your teams all the very best. Thank you very much for taking the time, Kaan Sana.
You're welcome.